Yes, Mayor. Shane Kelton, Director of Operations for the City of San Angelo. Um, with the topic of the winter storm that came through, just kind of wanted to kind of update council and the citizens kind of where we are from our streets perspective. As everyone knows, that snowy weather, wet weather, followed by cold, freezing weather is probably the harshest condition we can apply to a roadway, and so. With that, we did see quite a bit of road damage out there through this last storm, and of course, it's going to continue. It's going to continue to pop up as we move on, and we get into these spring months where we're going to see more rain. We're going to see more heating and the heating and thawing and contraction of the ground. So we're going to see more and more damage as we move on through the spring. But just to let everybody know that we have had staff out since it's kind of dried out. And we've supervisory staff from Street and Bridge. We've driven every street in town, and we've started assessing the streets. Just to kind of let everybody know, so far since the snow, we've entered in an additional 307 work orders for street repairs. Of those, 11 of those 307, we actually lost some entire blocks of streets where we just had pavement start peeling up blocks at a time. And so we have some significant, we do have some significant issues out there. Working through that, kind of going through some of those other things, looking at the quantities of materials it's going to take to replace these and how we're going to go about those. We'll be in the next week or two, we'll be sitting down with the city manager's office and working through some of these issues and some of the timelines that are going to be associated with them. With this much damage over this much, we're kind of estimating right now, looking at about 8,000 to 9,000 square yards of actual area that's going to have to be patched or replaced, and so that's quite a bit. So it's going to take our staff quite a bit of time. And of course, this is our busy season, in the Street and Bridge Department, trying to prepare for our seal coat, and so normally doing the crack sealing and the vegetation removal, those type things. We've kind of had to put that to the side for a little bit and start really trying to address some of these issues.
What would 9,000 square feet,
Square yards?
square yards cost?
Looking at, depending on whether we use hot mix asphalt or we use a cold lay product, we're looking anywhere from $85 to $120 per ton. Probably somewhere in that. Oh gosh, we're probably looking at 1,000 to 1,200 tons of material. Looking at that as it currently sits, of course, we realize that some of these over time, some of these holes are going to continue to expand and get larger over time. And then we're probably looking at another 4,000 to 5,000 yards of actual road base that when we actually cut the potholes out and cut those areas out, and we're replacing the road base underneath where all the damage occurred, probably another 4,000 to 5,000 yards of base is kind of a rough estimates right now. And so, and base is running us about, I believe, $8 to $10 a yard, depending on if we go get it or it's delivered to us. So, so they're
All of that adds up to about how much?
Just material wise, we're probably going to be in the, $170,000 to $200,000 range for material, and then of course there's labor on top of that. And then as we look as to how long it's going to take us with our existing staff to try to tackle some of these things, we may be looking at needing to contract some of these repairs out, especially some of these larger repairs where we're talking block long repairs at a time. And so again, be working with the city manager's office to kind of go through some of those scenarios and see what the best way to tackle some of these issues are, and try to get these roads back into shape as soon as we can. Again, because the longer we leave them, the longer those holes are out there, the more people are driving through them, just the bigger and the worse they're going to get, and the more extensive the repairs are going to take. And so we want to address these as soon as we can.
No, people will start talking about potholes. So as it relates to potholes, do we have a number specifically that people should call to report the potholes, or are you waiting to just make your first efforts at repairing these streets before you ask people to start calling in the pothole issues?
Yeah, Well, right now, we have we've had our supervisory staff again driving every street in San Angelo over the past 7 to 8 days, and so we realize that there's a lot of potholes out there, and again, those have all been the ones that we have seen have all been recorded. We have GPS coordinates, we have actual pictures of them, so those have been put into our database, and so we know where those are. We realize that there's going to be more pop up, but as we're working the streets, as we're methodically working through the system, we're going to try to tackle all of those as we can. So right now, instead of being inundated with 5 million phone calls, I would rather us wait for the phone calls and let my crew start actually addressing and tackling these potholes, and then we will, as we move further in through the progress, if new potholes start showing up in the areas where we've already addressed, then those at that point in time, we would like for people to make sure that they call those in, because again, as we're methodically moving through this, it may take us a while before we see a street that we've already addressed before we see it again. And so at that point in time, that's when we would want people to start making those phone calls, is after we address the initial brunt of all these. With that, we've also, just to kind of let everybody kind of or be aware of, as not only as we're talking about the street damage from the storm itself, we also had in the month of February we had 67 water main breaks. Most of these have been since the winter storm, and so each one of those water breaks also requires one of my crews, my trench repair crew, to go back and actually fill that back in and repair and replace the area that has been disrupted from the break. And if y'all have seen some of those around town, some of those can be rather large. We had some of these 12 and 8-inch lines break. It takes quite a bit of area for those guys to actually dig around that to make sure that they have a safe workspace to get in that hole to repair that pipe. And so we'll also be tackling those as well too. So, but again, unfortunately, we are very aware of the situation, and but again, we have a plan. We're putting together a plan right now to address it. We already do have crews that are just starting to drive streets and fill potholes right now. So, but we're on it, and just wanted to bring council and the public up to speed on where we are and what we've seen.
Thank you, Shane, very much.
Mayor?
Yes, Billy?
I have a question, Shane. As we look at repairing and replacing equipment on the water main breaks, are we doing anything to try to prevent so many breaks should we have another winter storm like this? I mean, are we burying the lines deeper or using different equipment?
Well, no, not necessarily. We're a lot of the breaks that we're seeing or that we saw there were a few on some PVC lines. A lot of these are on older lines that we have throughout town. Most of them are adequately buried deep enough. What we see that causes the majority of the breaks is when the ground actually starts freezing. We actually start shifting when you go from 70 degrees the week before to 5 and 0 degrees that week, and we stay below freezing for a week. We actually the ground starts shifting. There were quite a few where we actually had valve stems start leaking, things like that, where there is a more direct access to the cold at the valve stems. But again, most of our lines are already buried at deep enough, adequately enough to not be in the freeze zone of the ground. But again, it's mostly due to the shifting of the ground that causes the majority of our leaks.
And how deep are they buried?
In some of the older parts of town, that are really old, and we have water lines that are probably shallow as 18 to 20 inches. Most of the time, we try to bury everything below that, 24 to 48. In some areas, it's even deeper, depending on the terrain and the size of the line.
And when you say below the freeze zone, what is that? What is?
Most of the time in West Texas, that's nothing. But
I know. But now that we've had something, most
of the time, if we bury things 12 inches or below, we normally feel safe in Texas that's below any area that would freeze. And so, when you're, other than maybe some sprinkler lines, things like that, that are buried, in that 8 to 12 inch range, most of the time when you bury water lines, anything below 12 inches is sufficient to handle most freezes in Texas.
Thank you.
Mayor, I just want to emphasize, I know Shane just mentioned $200,000 for materials, but you have to understand that this is outside of the norm, so you have staff that will be working overtime. We have to outsource as well. So we're actually looking at probably doubling that up as well, so it's not as easy as just saying it's a $200,000 cost to the city on material. I would suspect it'd be between $300,000 to $400,000, if not more than that. So I just want to make sure that y'all understand that, because this is something that we'll have to work out and find the monies to make that happen, so. Okay.
Well, I want to make sure that if possible, that at the next city council meeting, we try to put together a better estimate so that we can start adjusting budgets and looking for the money to fund this, because it won't be in the traditional budget cycle that we would have budgeted these expenses. It's going to be outside the typical budget statistics, so we would like to have somewhat of an estimate on what this total cost is going to be. And we know it's an estimate, but we need to put numbers to it so we can better start looking for the funds to take care of these infrastructure
Will do.
catastrophic weather issues. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, please.
Shane, would any of this qualify for federal assistance, Shane, do you think?
Not that I'm aware of, but we will definitely be looking to see what we can find out there.